Uh, reputation has a lot to do with it, doesn't it? Now, over here, there's what's known as the Republican form of government. Yeah. See the guarantee clause? Yeah. I thought that's where I was living at. Now, as I mentioned, if you can be the president, then do that. And when I say I support the 96%, I support heterosexuality. I think that all heterosexuals should have a lot of sex as long as that's what they. It's a problem with that. Now, the guarantee clause, yes, Republican form of government. Now, no, as I said, I'm very supportive of the actual heterosexual population. I know they could marry one another, but try and get a divorce. I've had some difficulty for the last 7 years. Think of the repugnant strategies of motion in the court for default dissolution and then not getting notice of court hearings. It's really been a problem as a heterosexual because for some reason no one actually supports heterosexuals. Something you never hear of, do you? You have the gay, lesbian, transgender, and queer community, yes. But you never talk about the heterosexuals that happen to be well, 95% of the population for those that are eunuchs that are no longer sexually active. I know your tree's all wilted up, is that right? But I'm just, well, there are certain individuals that shouldn't, should you? Now, this guarantee, yeah, there's a clause there. Ooch. Now, U.S. Constitution, yeah, the federal government ensures for the states both a Republican form of government and protections from evasion or internal insurrections. I mentioned that, yes. You don't, yeah. Is there some reason why I'm being obstructed to demand jury trials? Where I couldn't actually advertise that I wanted the best of the best lawsuits. Yes, where I was sure. Now, let's say I were to get my sons today because I want you to give them to me. Yeah. And then I said, well, why don't you buy a ticket to hear what I have to say? Because I'm going to have the best lawsuits. And then I'm going to have that authority as a client. Now, well, seems to be a big insurrection against the actual, well, it's a guarantee. Well, I support heterosexuality and I want all heterosexuals to have as much sex as they want to have. And I do support having babies. It's a little different than a lot of the eugenicists that want to kill off the population. I know it's not a joke. There's too many of us. The planet will not support what I want to do, and that's well, well, let's look at it, okay? Of all of those citizens of the United States that have had a tax audit, how many of you did feel that the IRS did fairly treat you? Now, if I went through the tax attorneys, they, the tax attorneys, yeah. Let's say you're an attorney that specializes in helping taxpayers with their audits with the Internal Revenue Service. The whole idea of you being a tax attorney, yes, is that you have specialized in tax law. Now, I mentioned that Internal Revenue Service this morning. Yeah. Why don't you give me the 16,000 individuals that have arresting authority? Yeah. Because I thought a lot of those in the family were on the payroll and they were not declaring the amount of monies they were receiving to make shows, right, corrupt public officials, yes, and violate the laws of the United States. Now, let's say you got audited. Ooh. And I was talking to a large group of individuals that paid to hear what I had to say. And I said, do you know how many of those in office that I actually had the legal right to have an audit of their action? A lot of Americans, they would buy tickets to hear how many oaths of office in this nation actually got audited. Now, I did look at it, okay. Usually it's the last 3 years worth of tax returns, but it is within the jurisdiction of the IRS to go back 6 years. Yes. Now, I just needed to know of all the audits that the IRS has performed. Yes. In the last, 10 years, yeah, how many of those audits involved tax returns that were greater than 3 years ago? Now, I know, let's say you're an IRS auditor and I haven't paid taxes for 6 years because I'm being obstructed to being able to get any income because the sheriff's and the police departments. Now, this idea of the repugnant strategy of law enforcement to refuse to enforce fraud laws, I think it violates tax law. Could you give me all the laws of the Internal Revenue Service? Yes, every audit for the last 10 years, and every oath badge attorney, mandatory reporter, civil rights coordinator, and all the employees of each school district that have personally been audited by the IRS in the last 10 years. And then of those, how many only had to produce the last 3 years worth of tax returns instead of the last six? Because the idea of going through 6 years of tax returns for each and every